A humble young woman welcomed a man and his son, not knowing he was a millionaire with a secret. The rain showed no mercy that night. It hammered against the tin roofs with an almost painful persistence, making the old windows of the humble houses along the roadside rattle and shake. The street lights flickered like they too were cold, as if the entire world was trembling. Isabella Parker adjusted the scarf over her head, clutching against her chest a bag of day-old bread she had rescued from the bakery where she'd worked since she was 14. It wasn't the first time she'd returned home soaked, her shoes caked with mud, but that night, there was something different in the air, something that made her look to the side, just as she turned the corner onto her street. There, under the rusted awning of an abandoned bus stop, was a hunched figure. A man covered by a dark jacket held a sleeping child in his arms, wrapped only in a damp blanket. The image was so heartbreaking that Isabella stopped without thinking. The man looked up, his eyes were red-rimmed, his face marked by exhaustion, and a kind of broken dignity that still tried to hold on. He didn't ask for help, he just looked at her, and in that instant, Isabella felt her heart skip a beat.
"Is everything all right?"
she asked with a trembling voice, more from nerves than from cold. He nodded, but said nothing.
Shh.
The child let out a soft whimper in his sleep. Isabella swallowed hard.
He says,
"I have a small room. It's not much, but it's dry. If you just need to spend the night." The man hesitated. He looked at the child. He looked at the street, and then with a slight movement, he nodded. Isabella didn't know when she had made the decision. She hadn't even gotten a good look at the man's face. She just knew she couldn't leave him there. Not with that child in his arms. Not with that rain cutting through their skin like blades. The walk to her house was silent. He didn't ask anything, neither did she. But deep in her chest, something began to beat differently, as if she had opened a door that would change the course of everything. The interior of the house was modest, with a single lamp illuminating the corner where her grandmother used to sleep when she was alive. Isabella spread out an old mattress, found dry blankets, and prepared chamomile tea without asking questions. When she returned with the cup, the child was already sleeping soundly on the mattress. The man looked at her, with eyes full of something she couldn't name. "Thank you," he said finally, with a deep, broken voice. Isabella barely nodded. Something told her he wasn't just any stranger.
But it didn't matter.
Not that night. And if you too believe in those gestures that change destinies, subscribe right now for more stories that touch the soul. The next morning, the sky was still overcast, but the rain had stopped. A warm silence enveloped the house, while the aroma of reheated bread filled the air. Isabella moved with ease between the small kitchen and the improvised dining room. With simple gestures that showed years of routine, she placed 2 cups on the worn wooden table, next to a plate with pieces of sweet bread and melted butter.
"It's not much,
but it's made with love," she said with a shy smile. The man who had slept next to the child on the mattress sat up slowly. He caressed the little one's hair, who was still sleeping soundly, and then approached the table. He sat with a strange stiffness, as if that domestic space felt foreign to him. "I truly appreciate it," he murmured while taking the cup in his hands. Isabella noticed his fingers, long, clean, with well-cared-for nails. They weren't the hands of a laborer, nor of someone accustomed to the streets. She also observed the way he held the cup, with smooth, measured movements, and the way his back remained straight, even when sitting. "What's your name?" she asked cautiously. He hesitated. For a second a shadow crossed his face. "Samuel. And he's Matthew," he finally responded, pointing to the child who was still sleeping. Isabella nodded. She kept the name in silence. "I'm Isabella. I've lived here forever.
And
my grandmother raised me in this house," she explained, looking around. "She's gone now, but I try to keep things together." Samuel observed her. There was something in her way of speaking that reminded him of another time, of people who were no longer there, of a less cold world. "Do you work at the bakery on the corner?" he asked. She nodded, surprised. "How do you know?" "I saw it on the bread bag last night. And you smell like cinnamon," he said, sketching a smile for the first time. Isabella laughed, and something in her relaxed. During the rest of breakfast, they spoke little, but the silence was no longer uncomfortable. There was something suspended between them, like barely audible music, that both recognized, although they still didn't know why. Later, Isabella prepared clean clothes from her late uncle, while Samuel bathed Matthew with warm water in a basin. It was a simple domestic scene, but charged with unexpected tenderness. Isabella watched them from the doorway. Something in that image hurt and touched her at the same time. Who was this man? What was he doing there with this child, so far from everything? But she didn't ask. Sometimes, wounds need silence before answers. That night, the silence was different. It wasn't raining, but the sky remained heavy, as if it kept secrets among the clouds. Isabella had lent a thicker mattress for Samuel and Matthew, and although her house was small, there was something generous in every corner. She turned off the lights early, left her bedroom door ajar in case Matthew woke up, and lay down looking at the ceiling, her thoughts dancing between what she had lived and what she didn't dare to feel. On the other side of the hallway, Samuel wasn't sleeping. His eyes were open, fixed on the cracked ceiling, but what he saw was years away. A woman's face, a scream, a metallic crunch, the image of a destroyed car in the middle of the highway, the doctor's voice telling him it had been instantaneous, that she didn't suffer, as if that could heal something. He turned toward Matthew, who was sleeping deeply. He caressed him carefully, as if he feared waking him, as if that caress could also break him. Then he covered his face with his hands, containing a tremor that rose from his chest. Isabella from her room heard a soft sob. She got up, hesitated for an instant, and walked barefoot to the door. She didn't knock, she didn't say anything, she just sat on the other side of the door, on the cold floor, with her legs embraced. That's how they stayed for a while, two broken souls, separated by a thin wall, united by something neither understood yet. The next morning, Samuel came down with red-rimmed eyes, but a more serene expression. He thanked her for breakfast, helped sweep the patio without her asking, and then offered to paint one of the exterior walls, where humidity had already gained ground. Isabella watched him from the kitchen window, with an expression that mixed tenderness and fear. He was a stranger, but there was something about him that made his presence seem familiar. In the afternoon, the three of them played with an old ball that Matthew had found behind the house. The child's laughter broke something in Samuel. As if for the first time in a long time, he allowed himself to be here, present, alive. At the end of the day, Isabella prepared rice with lentils, and Samuel insisted on washing the dishes. "Thank you for all this," he said, without looking at her directly. "I'm not used to it. Maybe it's time to get used to it." Isabella responded, softly. He smiled, but said nothing more. That night, for the first time he slept without dreaming. Do you believe that everyone deserves a second chance, even if they've lied to protect themselves? Tell me in the comments. The days that followed seemed to slip by with the softness of a sigh, as if time had decided to remain suspended in that small house on the edge of town. Each dawn brought with it the promise of something new, although neither of them knew yet what. Isabella woke early, before the sun appeared, lit the wood stove skillfully, and prepared black coffee in an old coffee pot she had inherited from her grandmother. That bitter drink had an aroma that seemed to envelop the entire house, announcing that a new day was beginning, slow but full of small daily miracles. Samuel sat on the wooden bench next to the table, contemplating with quiet eyes the faint light that filtered through the worn curtains. He didn't say much, but his presence was an unexpected anchor in the storm of his past. Sometimes he let out a shy smile, almost as if he were rediscovering the world through eyes that had already seen too much. Matthew ran and played in the dusty patio, with contagious energy. He touched every surface, explored every corner with a curiosity that seemed to illuminate the entire house. His crystal-clear laughter was like music that broke the silence, slowly melting the invisible walls that Samuel and Isabella had built around their hearts. One morning, Samuel appeared at the bakery for the first time since he arrived at the house. With hands that still didn't know the routine of work, he tried to carefully place the bread in the baskets. His long fingers, once accustomed to another kind of life, learned the simple and exhausting art of manual labor. The neighbors looked at him with curiosity, some with suspicion, but Samuel's humility was so palpable that no one dared to judge him. Isabella watched him from a corner, with her chest tight, struggling against a whirlwind of contradictory emotions. There was a hidden fragility behind a facade of dignity. Something in his way of moving, in his manner of smiling shyly, challenged everything she thought she knew about the world. Each afternoon, when the sun began to set and painted the sky with orange and pink tones, Isabella and Samuel sat Matthew on the sidewalk in front of the house. With an old worn ball, the child learned to kick under the attentive gaze of his two improvised caregivers. Matthew's laughter and small stumbles seemed to sew invisible threads between them, weaving a fabric of hope that still didn't dare to name itself. Isabella closed her eyes for an instant, letting those images engrave themselves in her soul. The child's laughter, Samuel's elongated shadow against the wall, the simple warmth of a home that, although small and humble, seemed capable of containing the universe. But under that light, there were also shadows, small signs that Isabella couldn't ignore. The way Samuel looked around with caution, the moments when he stayed quiet for hours, lost in thoughts that seemed to burn like embers. There was a deep secret that he wasn't ready to reveal yet, and that weighed in the air like a silent threat. However, in those moments of calm and tenderness, Isabella felt that her heart began to beat with a force she hadn't known for a long time. It was a fearful beat, yes, but also brave, a beat that said that sometimes the brightest light is born in the middle of the deepest darkness. The days of calm and laughter seemed suspended in a fragile bubble that stretched slowly with each dawn, but Isabella knew, although she didn't want to admit it, that peace was temporary. Something loomed on the horizon, a shadow that didn't stop growing. It was a warm afternoon, with a sky covered by gray clouds that foretold a storm. Matthew played in the backyard, kicking an old ball with the clear laughter that filled the air. Samuel helped at the bakery, carefully placing the bread in the baskets, greeting neighbors with a shy smile that sometimes struggled to maintain itself. Isabella watched them from the door of her house, with her heart beating fast without knowing why. Then he appeared, an elegant man, in a dark suit, and penetrating gaze, crossed the town square with firm and determined step. His shoes shone under the dim light of evening, and his face was a mask of determination and coldness. His eyes, sharp as daggers, slowly scanned every corner until they stopped on Samuel. A flash of recognition crossed his face, as if he had found what he had been looking for after years of fruitless search. The man advanced without hesitation, approaching the bakery with undeniable authority. "Samuel Davidson," he said with a firm voice, loaded with a mixture of reproach and urgency. "I didn't expect to find you here." Samuel tensed instantly. His muscles tightened, his darkened eyes fixed on that man who seemed to bring with him an entire world from which he had tried to escape. "I don't know what you're talking about," he responded with a controlled voice, but inside him a tremor began to make its way. The man wasn't fooled. From his jacket he took out a crumpled photograph, with worn edges. In it Samuel appeared smiling next to an older man, both dressed in impeccable suits, reflecting a past that Samuel had buried deeply. "Your family is looking for you. They want you to return. This cannot continue like this," he sentenced with an imperative tone. Isabella, who had been watching from the door, felt the air thicken around her. The silence that followed was heavier than any word. She saw how Samuel shifted uncomfortably, how his gaze desperately searched for an escape. When the man walked away, leaving behind a trail of tension, Samuel remained motionless, as if the weight of the world had just fallen on his shoulders. That night, the house that had been a refuge transformed into an invisible prison. Samuel walked from side to side, his steps echoing on the wooden floor. The child slept peacefully, oblivious to the storm that grew outside and inside. He tried to write a letter to Isabella, sincere words that would explain who he was, why he had fled, what fear consumed him. But his fingers trembled, the phrases vanished, and the paper remained blank. The clock marked the hours, but Samuel felt that time played against him, dragging him toward a destiny he didn't want to face. Isabella, for her part, felt the distance grow between them. Although she didn't know how to stop it, the shadow of the secret that Samuel hid began to tint gray the light they had built together. The storm that the clouds announced finally burst in the sky, and the rain hit the windows furiously, like a reflection of the chaos that was unleashed in their souls. Silence had become an uncomfortable and persistent guest in the small house where Isabella, Samuel, and Matthew tried to build a refuge. Samuel disappeared for hours without warning, leaving behind a void that weighed more than the rain that had fallen days before. One afternoon, when the sun began to fall and tinted the sky with orange and purple tones, Isabella felt an uneasiness that she could no longer ignore. She left Matthew playing with a doll in the kitchen, and went out to the patio, breathing the fresh and humid air that announced the arrival of night. She searched with her gaze, calling him in a low voice, "Samuel, are you there?" She only received the echo of her own voice. The wind moved the branches of the old tree that rose next to the wooden fence. The crickets began to sing, but the answer didn't come. With slow and heavy steps, Isabella walked toward the path that bordered the town, guided by a sensation that pressed against her chest. When she turned the corner, she saw a solitary figure moving away. It was Samuel, with his jacket gathered in his hands, as if he wanted to leave behind not only the town, but also the invisible weight he carried. Her heart shrank. For an instant, time seemed to stop. The image of the man she had welcomed, who seemed vulnerable and strong at the same time, disappearing in the distance. She returned home with moist eyes and a cracked soul, wondering if that story that had begun to write itself between them was just a mirage. The night became heavy and silent. Matthew slept peacefully, oblivious to the torment of adults. Isabella sat on the edge of her bed, with trembling hands and her gaze lost in the darkness. She wondered how she could trust someone who abandoned her without explanations, who took refuge in silence when she needed him most. She wondered if her own desires had blinded her. When Samuel returned, hours later, the atmosphere in the house had changed. The moonlight entered through the window, bathing the room with a cold and distant glow. Isabella waited for him, with eyes full of questions and her heart beating fast. "Why do you leave without saying anything?" she whispered, with a broken voice. "Why don't you trust me?" Samuel looked at her, but avoided her gaze. His hands closed into fists and his chest rose and fell with difficulty. "I don't want to hurt you," he said finally, with a muffled voice. "But there are things I can't share yet." She felt a knot in her throat, a mixture of sadness and contained rage. She wanted to hug him. She wanted to push him away. She wanted to understand and at the same time, flee. For a moment, the silence between them was more eloquent than any word. In that pause, charged with emotions, both understood that the path wouldn't be easy. Isabella retired to her room, leaving the door ajar, and cried in silence. She knew that Samuel carried deep wounds, that perhaps would never heal, but she also knew that she had to protect herself. That night, she slept with the bitter certainty that the man she had welcomed was also an enigma, that she might never be able to fully decipher. The days that followed were a delicate balance between hope and uncertainty. Samuel remained close, but there was an invisible distance that grew with each unspoken silence. One afternoon, while the sun bathed the small kitchen with golden light, Samuel finally decided to open a crack in his wall. They sat together at the wooden table, the air charged with words that struggled to come out. "Isabella, there's something I must tell you," he began with a low voice, avoiding her eyes. "I didn't flee out of cowardice, but because my previous life was full of wounds. I didn't know how to heal." Isabella listened to him in silence, her fingers intertwined, her gaze fixed on the light that entered through the window. "My son isn't just any child," he continued, with a broken voice. "He has a father who didn't know how to be there, and I made decisions that distanced me from that world." He didn't mention his fortune or the surname that weighed on him, but his words were enough to ignite a flame of questions and emotions. Isabella felt that the truth was near, but also that there was a wall that Samuel wasn't ready to tear down. "I don't ask you to understand everything now," he said. "Just trust that I'm trying to do the right thing." She nodded, with a deep sigh, accepting that fragment of truth as a bridge between them. The days filled with small shows of affection and care, and although the secret continued to be a shadow, its presence began to lose weight before the light of what was being born between them. If you've ever let yourself be carried away by your heart, give this story a like. Samuel washed the dishes while Isabella cleared the table. For the first time in a long time, there seemed to be space for calm, for hope, but destiny, always unpredictable, was already preparing the next storm. The day dawned gray and heavy, as if the entire sky was preparing an inevitable omen. The low clouds covered the town, muting the colors and leaving an oppressive atmosphere that seemed to wrap every corner. Isabella got up early, with a disturbing sensation nestled in her chest, a silent whisper that warned her that the tranquility that had begun to flourish was about to vanish. While she lit the small wood stove and prepared coffee, the bitter aroma mixed with the cold environment, like a subtle warning.
Suddenly,
A murmur of firm and determined voices broke the quiet. Isabella approached the window, and her gaze captured the figure of a tall and elegant man, dressed in a perfectly pressed dark suit, accompanied by two assistants who carried folders and briefcases with carefully organized documents. The man advanced with sure and direct step toward the house. His expression was serious, implacable, and his eyes transmitted a mixture of authority and determination that admitted no objections. Upon opening the door, his gaze fixed on Samuel with cutting intensity, as if he wanted to pierce through each of his defenses.
Samuel Davidson, he said,
with a firm and hard voice, "I come representing the family to demand your immediate return. It's time for you to assume your responsibilities and fulfill your legacy." Samuel remained motionless, his face tense, his jaw clenched, while his hands trembled slightly, betraying the storm that was waged within him. He didn't utter a word, but the weight of that moment was unbearable. Isabella, from the door, felt how the atmosphere was charged with palpable tension, as if the air itself became dense and difficult to breathe. The security that had begun to sprout in her heart slowly crumbled, dissolved by words that opened an abyss between what she thought she knew and the hidden truth. The man handed several documents to Samuel, contracts, deeds, irrefutable proof of a life and a surname that he had tried to keep secret, an invisible fortune for that simple town, an identity that violently clashed with the humble reality they now shared. Isabella remained paralyzed, with her heart shrunken, while her eyes scanned the pages. Each word, each figure, each signature, was a direct blow to the hope she had sustained. Later, in the gloom of the living room, Samuel tried to explain himself, but the words seemed to slip through his fingers, unable to heal the breach that had opened. "I'm not the man you thought you knew," he murmured with a broken voice, "but I'm the only one I can be." Isabella looked at him, with eyes full of pain and a mixture of rage and sadness that choked her. "How could you hide this?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "How do you expect me to trust now?" A heavy silence settled between them, while outside the rain began to fall furiously, hitting the windows like a reflection of the chaos that reigned in their souls. Finally, with a cold and painful gesture, Isabella asked him to leave. Samuel nodded without protesting. His figure vanished into the stormy night, and with it he took part of the dream they had begun to build together. The storm roared outside the house, flooding every corner with its deafening noise, like a symbol of the internal storm that now consumed them both. The house, which until recently pulsed with laughter and hopes, had now become a cold and empty space, like a distant echo of what it was. The silence was heavy, almost unbearable, and seemed to have settled in every corner, amplifying Isabella's loneliness in an almost tangible way. She sat on the edge of the bed, her hands trembling, looking at the shadows that danced with the flickering light of the dim lamp. Each memory of Samuel became a thorn that pierced her chest, a bitter and sharp mixture of love and betrayal that she didn't know how to process or fully understand. Matthew, oblivious to the storm that consumed the adults, slept peacefully in his crib, his calm and rhythmic breathing, a painful contrast to Isabella's inner turmoil. His innocence was a cruel reminder of what was at stake, and she clung to that small reason not to give up. The days passed slowly, almost dragging, as if time had stopped just for her. She tried to maintain the routine, prepare food, take care of Matthew, but each daily gesture reminded her of Samuel's absence, the man who had changed her life forever, and who now had left her broken and full of doubts. Samuel, for his part, wandered through the city like a wandering soul, facing the weight of his decisions and the rejection he had provoked. Pride and love faced each other in his interior in a silent and brutal battle, a torment that consumed him slowly. On a particularly dark night, while the rain hit the glass relentlessly, and the wind lashed the windows with force, Samuel found himself in front of the house door, trembling, with his heart in his throat and sweaty hands. He hesitated for long seconds before finally raising his hand and knocking. Isabella opened cautiously, her eyes reflecting the pain, distrust and uncertainty that consumed her. She didn't say anything at first, just looked at him, searching for answers in that man she loved but who had also hurt her deeply. He spoke with a broken voice, almost a whisper full of repentance and despair. "I'm not perfect. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I can't stop trying." Silence was her only response, heavy and dense like the air before a storm. But that night, something changed between them. The distance that seemed insurmountable began to yield slowly, and although the path ahead was uncertain, dark and painful, a spark of hope began to shine timidly in the middle of the darkness that surrounded them. The days following the encounter were a careful and slow dance between the desire to heal and the latent fear of reopening deep wounds. Isabella and Samuel began to rebuild their bond with patience, aware that trust is a delicate and fragile thread that needs time to weave itself again. Without rushing, respecting each silence and each gesture. One luminous morning, the sun timidly filtered through the worn curtains, bathing the room with warm and welcoming light that seemed to announce a new beginning. Matthew woke up with a wide and contagious smile, and his pure and unconditional joy managed to melt some of the accumulated tension between the adults. Samuel, with a surprising delicacy, prepared breakfast with care and attention to every detail, while Isabella watched him from the kitchen door. In her gaze there was a mixture of tenderness, caution, and a timid hope that seemed to be reborn. Their gazes crossed in an instant, suspended in time, and in that simple gesture, they said more to each other than in 1,000 words. They decided to go out together to the town, walking slowly through the familiar streets, like a family seeking to find their place in the world again. They greeted neighbors who observed them with respect and curiosity, and each step they took filled the silence with small conversations, timid laughter, and the complicity that only is born when two souls decide to move forward, despite past storms. In a nearby park, Matthew ran free, his clear and contagious laughter resonating like bells that announce hope. Samuel encouraged him with soft words and a genuine smile, encouraging him to stretch his arms toward the imaginary clouds, playing with the innocence that only a child can have. Isabella, from a nearby bench, smiled with a warm heart, feeling that for the first time in a long time, the future seemed like a blank canvas, ready to be painted with new dreams and promises. But under that renewed light, the shadows of the past remained present, whispering silent warnings that neither could ignore. The life that Samuel had left behind wasn't willing to forget him, or allow his story to end so easily. That night, while the improvised family dined under the dim light of an antique lamp, Samuel's hand found Isabella's on the table. It was a small gesture, but charged with unspoken promises and dreams that began to be reborn with force. As the days passed, the calm they had recovered seemed increasingly fragile, like delicate crystal about to break with the slightest touch. Samuel carried in his chest a weight that became more difficult to hide with each dawn, and Isabella felt, without being able to specify when, that the truth was about to explode, like a storm contained within her. One afternoon, while the golden light of the sun filtered through the worn curtains, tinting the room with warm and melancholic tones, Samuel made a decision that seemed to weigh on his soul. Sitting together in the small living room, with Matthew playing nearby on the floor, he began to speak with a low and trembling voice, charged with nerves and sincerity. "Isabella, I need to tell you everything," he said, swallowing saliva. "I can't continue hiding what I really am from you. I can't live in that lie anymore." She looked at him fixedly, with open eyes and her heart beating a mile a minute, knowing that that moment was crucial, that from that conversation nothing would ever be the same again. The silence became dense, full of expectation and fear, as if the entire room held its breath. "I'm not just a man with a complicated past," he continued, with his gaze nailed to his hands. "I'm heir to a fortune that could change our lives, but I also carry a family debt that could destroy them." The words collapsed in the air with the force of an unexpected blow. Isabella felt a knot in her throat that prevented her from speaking, and her eyes filled with contained tears that threatened to overflow. "Why didn't you tell me before?" she whispered with a broken voice. "Why hide something so big from me, something that could have changed everything?" Samuel lowered his gaze, struggling against the emotion that drowned him. "I was afraid," he confessed. "Afraid that everything we've built would crumble, afraid of losing you and Matthew, but now I know I can't continue living in that shadow." The clash between the simple and authentic life they were trying to build, and the complex and dark world Samuel came from became more tangible than ever, filling the space between them with tensions and unanswered questions. Isabella, with her heart divided between hope and fear, knew in that instant that the hardest test was yet to come, and that only together could they face it. Have you ever had to face a secret that changed everything in your life? How did you overcome it? Share your experience in the comments, and connect with this story. The sun timidly appeared on the horizon, painting the sky with soft tones of pink and gold, when Isabella woke up with a mixture of nerves, hope, and a calm she hadn't felt for a long time. The fresh morning air entered through the open window, filling the room with the aroma of wet earth and new promises. That morning seemed different, as if the world itself was giving them a second chance. Samuel was already in the kitchen, moving with unusual serenity while preparing breakfast. The aroma of freshly made coffee and toasted bread mixed with the warm light that flooded the small house, creating a cozy atmosphere full of life. His eyes lit up when he saw her wake up, and without need for words, his smile transmitted a renewed commitment, a silent promise to be present, without hiding or fleeing. Matthew, with his innocent and contagious energy, ran toward them, filling the house with his clear and pure laughter, that sound that had been the thread that kept them united in the middle of storms and doubts. In that moment, the improvised family seemed complete, strong and ready to face any adversity. Isabella sat at the table, still with her heart racing, and took Samuel's hand with tenderness and determination. She felt that despite the wounds each one carried, a stronger, authentic and true love had been reborn, capable of forgiving and building on the ruins of the past. "This time there will be no secrets," Samuel whispered with a firm, almost trembling voice. "Together we'll face whatever comes, without fear or reservations." She nodded, with tears of relief and joy shining in her eyes, ready to start over, without masks or fears, accepting the imperfection and beauty of what they had. The past was still there, with its shadows, ghosts, and challenges, but it no longer defined or controlled them, because they had chosen the present, love, the family they had built with courage, patience, and hope. And in that instant, under the warm and soft light of dawn, everything seemed possible. The future opened before them like a blank canvas, waiting to be painted with dreams, commitments, and new stories. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe for more tales full of emotion and hope.